If you watch the videos on how to drape basic patterns, you'll recognize this piece as the one that I draped as a princess line pattern. And the reason this is a princess line pattern is that the darts are lined up right on top of each other as one piece instead of four pieces that don't match quite the same way. I mean, these can be sewn together when these darts are together and this dart is together. They actually will match, and so will these. But they haven't been balanced so that the darts line up with each other yet. And just this way, they work just fine for most of our homework because they're an individual skirt or an individual top. But if we want to make something longer, or we want to sew it together as a dress, then we want to make everything all balanced in a geometric way instead of just matching. So I've got my 3 parallel lines on here, and I like to true it up on the fabric before I transfer it to the paper. So I have my 3 parallel lines. I want to make sure that they're actually parallel, but I did that before I started draping actually. So those 3 lines are parallel, and they're parallel on the grain. So what I need to do now is make my dart centers also parallel. And when I do that, I want them to be parallel to the lines. And I just said that. So what I'm looking at now is lining up the line out here and looking how that connects with these 2 markings. So this is the end of my back dart, and this is the top of my bodice back dart. So if I connect those 2 lines and know that this ends here and that ends there, then I have to change the placement of this, because my original dart opening was this wide, but I want to center it over this line so the end points stay in the same place. So my total is 1 inch and a little more than 1/8. So I need 1/2 inch and a little more than 1/16. So I'm going to move that out. And this one, so my new total is now the same, and it's the inside line. So I'm going to redraw this dart, and we commonly call this a fisheye dart or a double-ended dart. And I've made it with sharp corners, and you want fairly sharp corners at the long end. But if you actually sew this together with a sharp corner here and here, then the fabric will tear as you breathe and move, because the thread is usually stronger than the fabric. So if I were to actually sew this dart, even just changing it a tiny bit and giving it that bit of a curve is going to make it so that it protects the fabric and it hangs more smoothly. So depending on what I'm doing with it, I will use that curved part. So when I sew a dart like this, instead of starting at the very corner, I'll start here and go this way. And then I'll come back and start here and go downward, so that I overlap a little bit right there on the curved area, and I get 2 pointed dart ends, and I don't have a sharp point here. Alright, and before the video started, I compared the distances of my armpit, and I make sure that they're equally distant. So I can connect those now too. So the upper part of that line is going to be perfectly straight. And this is one of those rulers that I left in the car on a hot day, so it's got little warp spots in it. So this line is a little more than 3/4 of an inch on both sides. And I want to mark that at the bottom too. So 3/4 of an inch plus a little bit. And 3/4 of an inch plus a little bit. So from the widest part of the hip down, I'm going to have a line that's parallel to my imaginary center. And it's imaginary because that's bigger than the pattern piece I need, but it's the straight line that I used when I was draping. And you can go back and look at that if you're interested. So that leaves me with this little curved portion right here. And this side appears to be the most accurate. So I'm going to line up my curve, and this is a very form curve rule. This one's by Fairgate, and it says 12/124 on it, but a Fairgate very form curve rule is my personal favorite. It doesn't have to be yours, but that's the one I like. So when I line this up, I'm finding that if I use the curve from 5.5 down to 9.5, it lines up pretty well with that curve that I got when I was draping. So I want to flip this over and use the exact opposite, and that way I know they'll be the same. So you can use your curve in both opposite directions. You can also use it going the other opposite directions. So I've got a side seam that I like, and they match, and they're exactly opposite, and they're balanced in a geometric way. If I were to use this side seam, I would do the same thing as I did with that dart and just blend that a little bit so that it's a smooth curve. And if I end up separating it for some reason, then I would go back to using a right angle. And what I mean by a right angle is this one angles down from there, and this one angles up a little bit from here. And then I lowered the center front marking a little bit from what I marked it on the dress form, because the line under where I was marking on the dress form actually was a little bit low. I mean, it was a little bit high, so I moved it down to match. But because I'm working on a princess line right now, I'm not going to worry about where my waistline seam would be. I've got it marked there. So when I did this back dart, I could start from where I marked my skirt dart and go up, and they match pretty well. But on my front, I have to go with where the bust point is, no matter where this one ended up. So I'm going to line up with my center front and come straight down from that line. And that actually looks very similar too, but this is my original width, so I need to divide that one in half. And that's an inch, so I'm going to use a 1/2 inch on each side. And I prefer to use a mechanical pencil because I don't want my lines to get wide, so I'm going to pause and go sharpen my pencil. This one's nice and dark so you can see it, but I need to sharpen it. So it looks like on my front, this is where my dart level ended. And my front body came straight down from there. So I've got kind of a weird situation happening right here that only has to do with the princess line. And that's a little wider than an 1/8 inch. So the odd thing is that this is the end of my dart. And that might be confusing for a minute, but just stay with me. If I bring this straight down, I have more fullness in my bust area than my tummy area, so I will need to sew this seam straight down all the way to the end. And that's why it works as a princess line, and it will help make more sense out of why these pieces that I draped in a different way don't look quite the same. But they will, because this original dart is going to be narrower by that much. So if I think of it this way and I draw the line the rest of the way back up, if I sew this as a skirt by itself, this part is just going to be gone. It'll just get folded out and together, which is another way of observing that this is how wide the dart is, so we're getting this part of the dart plus that part of the dart, and the center is missing. This is only here when it's part of a princess line. So I'm connecting the rest of the lines that I got when I was draping. And those are my finished dart lines. Except for this one. This side blends into the side body of the back. And it's going to fit better going the other direction. So I'm going to put in a pretend princess line, but I know I want this dart to end here. And I'll put the other side as wide as I need it to be to match my back shoulder. So when you sew this dart together, you're going to press it down this fold, and then you're going to sew it on those lines. And this will have some space removed all the way down. But that way, this is completely balanced so that it's easy to use for your princess line. And if I want to shorten my dart so that it hangs better, this is the basic fit wedge. But if I want to shorten my dart so that I actually can use it for part of my, well, so that it's finished and easy to use, I'm going to mark both of the inner edges and redraw the line so that this is now my inside princess line and this is my outside princess line. And that goes back to when we were talking about making princess lines and moving the edge over so that you have horizontal ease instead of vertical ease so that it fits better. That's what that's about. And then this line is going to come straight down as well, because when you have a princess line, you have vertical lines that separate it instead of a horizontal waistline that separates it. And it looks like I made a little mistake there because I was looking at the center. So if you would like this pattern to use, I can leave copies of it for you to pick up, or I can put it online, but it doesn't fit on a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet, so you'll need to add extra. It would actually be 13 inches at the shortest. So I'd need to divide it into a couple of sheets, and then you could tape it together. My shoulder line is going to be a perfectly straight line. And my back will be straight when this is folded. When I put those two together, then I would use my curve and draw that together. So we'll come back to that. This is the printout of those pattern pieces, and I'm going to make it easy and cut on this straight line right here on each of them, and then I'm going to tape them back together. So I will post them online, and you can print them out and do the same thing if you want to use them. You don't have to use them. The only way to know for sure that they're accurate is to come in and trace off a copy of your own. During COVID, that isn't always going to be practical. So your accuracy of fitting the dress form will be better if you come in and get a copy, but the best way is to trace off from the original. So if you have questions about which you should do, just contact me. I'm going to cut them apart. I have separated them exactly on the red line, and then I want to make sure that they line up together straight. And this one was a tiny bit crooked, so I'm just making sure that I line it up with the ruler, because the center front, since it's on the fold, does have to be perfectly straight. So I'm putting tape on both sides, and then I'm going to turn it over and put tape all the way across the back, because I want to make sure that it's completely connected. And I started from the middle and pushed both directions, so it's laying perfectly flat, and I'm double checking my straight line. And then I have done the same thing with the back piece. So I'm going to cut them out and make sure that they're working together correctly. The best way is to cut the line barely off, but since my line is so fat, I may end up going down the center of the line. So this is my center front. I can cut it on the fold, or I can add seam allowance. And you'll be able to find possibly 3 different versions of how to come up with this same pattern on just our canvas page. They both work. One is found by draping, one is found by flat patterning, one is very common in the book that we use, the other one is more common as a draping pattern, but I find this one more straightforward and accurate with less time. Everybody has their own favorite way to do things, and you need to do the one that makes the most sense to you. Okay, before I cut this, I have to fold it. So I'm folding that the same way I fold all the others. Crease it sharply all the way out to the edge, and bring the one side to match the other. And while they're folded, I like to cut them off. So I'm not adding seams because this is my basic pattern for my sloper. Maybe back in the old days, slopes was the way that they thought of pattern making. I usually call it a basic pattern or a block just because sloper sounds sloppy to me. And you know, that was just TMI and you didn't need to hear it, but people ask me why it's called a sloper, and to be honest, I really don't know. It's just that time-honored tradition that we keep perpetuating. Okay, so I could use either neckline. Traditionally, you lower the front neck a ½ inch from what it is on the dress form full scale, so I lowered it a 1/4. This line is exactly the line on the dress form, and this is more where you would wear it for women's wear. If you were draping a man form, they typically have their necklines right up against their neck if it's a shirt collar. So you can use either one, just make sure that your collar matches whatever neckline you're using. And there is what would be a front sheath dress. So you could fold this in half, well, fold it down the middle of the dart. I'll fold it the other way so it's easier to see. Fold it down the middle of the dart and just follow that line and then press it. You probably have to clip this area right here, but then you could just put it on and it would be a sheath dress, all out of one piece of fabric. If you separate it into a princess dress, there are more things you can do with it. I'm going to add a notch before I cut it apart. So that it's easier to sew. Down and just measure straight across right there. But I'll change my notch so that it's perpendicular to the edge. And see, I should stop and sharpen this pencil now because it's not being very accurate. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, you could stop and make a copy of that if you want to in that form, but to turn it into a true princess line now, I'm going to separate it on the line, and this is like the princess lines that we did up just the bodice, but now the skirt is attached. And we have our notches already. I'll cut this side off too because this little center section is garbage. And you'll add seam allowance to both sides. But you don't want to keep this part. It's not part of the pattern anymore. It's just a dart that disappears. And if you prefer the book method of spreading that open, you can do that, but I don't like the way they turn out that way. So this is the pattern I'm going to give you, and you can make choices. Okay. So there's my side front and my center front. And you can still see the grain line on there from the fabric. Side, front princess. That's upside down for you, isn't it? And center front princess. This is where it's on the fold, so I'll just put a grain line there. So don't forget that you need to add seam allowance to both sides of the side front and possibly, well, the side of the center front and possibly fold line of the center front. And I'll do the same thing with this piece, and then we'll compare the side seams. If we sat down and carefully did the three-dimensional math, they would add up to the same size, but I like the way I arrived at what we've got better. So that adds up the same, and there's more on the center front of the skirt and less on the side seam. So basically, the dark got moved over. And I just think that's more accurate, so. Rather than spending the time doing the three-dimensional math, I usually just jump in the dark. And then I have several draped pieces, and I just use those as part of my basic pattern. So the line right here is a little bit fat, and I'll show you how I determined that when I get it cut out. Here, the way the back comes together with the front at the shoulder, I want to make sure that they're equal. So I'm actually going to push the back over a little bit more so that it lines up with that side seam of the front, and make sure that I've got a matched shoulder seam on both sides, and I do. So because there's more darting in the top, we had to cut out extra down the middle of the front, but on the back, they match. The back, this dart you can actually make larger or smaller by pivoting the side seam in and out a little bit, and you see that on the example that Maria does when she's showing you how to do it with just the basic pattern. The 4 pieces, front bodice and skirt, back bodice and skirt. So I was able to just drape it so that it was the same. But it's the same concept. Did I put my notches on here? It's easier to put the notches on before you cut it apart, but if you forget, you can just put it back together. And I don't want a sharp point right here either, it's just a gentle curve. As close to the original as possible, but still blended. And I've got my fingers behind the scissors. And I have my elbows anchored at my side. So I'm getting a nice smooth line. Okay, so this is garbage, and so was the one that came from the front. Center back, side front, center front. Well, I see a little problem right there because we've got more back than we do front because of the way that was on the copy machine. So I'm just going to flip this one over and line it up on the side and make sure that those match. And they do. If they don't, you can make them match. And then I will just cut those off at the same level. So I'm including the rest of the paper in it. You can do it the way that makes sense to you. Line those up together and just cut off a straight line right there. And they will all match. And now you can turn it into what you want to and just add some allowance. And let me know when you want to make appointments to meet with me, and I'll help you figure out how to turn whatever picture you've chosen into your project. So seam allowance, down every section, the same shape that it is. Please use 1/4 of an inch on your connection between the center front and the side front and the center back and the side back. But on the side seams, if you use a wider seam allowance, then it's easier to make adjustments. I I would use a 1/2 inch on the side seams and a 1/2 inch down the center back because they're straight, and then it's easier to keep track of how much you have.